Thanks for joining me on episode 874 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Mark Aho, author of Building Wealth and Living in Faith. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the right relationship between faith and money is key to doing that, and one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mater.
That's what's going to make the goal easier to achieve, because here's the truth. The goal is going to get hard if it's worth doing. If the goal is big enough to be worth doing, then by definition, that goal is going to get hard. And this is why it's so important to have a why that's big enough to keep you going. Because...
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about impacting the world through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about the difference between a why and a goal. I share why having a strong enough why makes goals easier to achieve. And I also talk about remembering to have a why big enough, especially for those things that scare you.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
Often when I talk to people about what they want to achieve and I ask them about their why, what I get back instead is a goal. There is a difference between the why and the goal itself. When I ask somebody what they want to achieve and they tell me that they want to, get out of debt, for example, or they want to be able to spend more time with their family and less time working. Or maybe they want a new kind of career and they want to find a way to work for themselves instead of continuing to work for somebody else. Whatever it is, those are all goals. They have a beginning, they have a middle, they have an end. They have a distinct way that you start them, and it's very clear, and you can tell when you've gotten to the end of them as well. That is what makes it a goal. That is what makes it something that is achievable. You can turn it into the old SMART goal kind of template or smarter goal kind of template that we've talked about on earlier podcast. But the goal isn't the why. The why is what's behind the reason for the goal. Why do you want to get out of debt? Why do you want to stop working for someone else and start your own business? Why do you want to do these things? Why do you want to spend more time with the family? What's the why behind it? Because the truth is, when a goal, especially if a goal is a big, scary goal, a difficult one, a challenging one, then what ends up happening is you burn out. You get frustrated. You get tired. And then because you get tired, you give up. You quit whenever something is really something that you would consider important, but you end up getting burned out on it and getting exhausted before you're done. And because of that, you end up giving up on it. You end up quitting on it. And that is why it's so important to have a why behind the goal. And the why needs to be an emotional construct. It needs to be about the feeling behind it more than the actual facts behind it. It's less about what you want and more about the emotion for why you want it. What is it about this goal that's important to you? What is it about the goal that makes you change your feelings and your relationships? What is it that will make you change what you've done forever? What is it that will make you get out of the simple and into the hard? Because that is your why. The thing that's big enough to keep you going even when it gets hard. That's what's going to make the goal easier to achieve. Because here's the truth. The goal is going to get hard if it's worth doing. If the goal is big enough to be worth doing, then by definition, that goal is going to get hard. And this is why it's so important to have a why that's big enough to keep you going. Because when it gets hard, you've got to keep going. You've got to continue to work on it. You've got to continue to strive. You've got to continue to push. That's the only way to achieve a difficult goal. And so the bigger the goal is, the scarier the goal is, the more intimidating the goal is, the more work you have to do figuring out what is your why and making sure that your why is big enough. Because only if your why is big enough will you do the hard work and not quit and not burn out and not get tired and just give up when it gets hard. This is why it's important to have a big why, especially for challenging and scary goals. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips. That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.